Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving deep into one of the most fascinating and beloved corners of George R.R. Martin's universe, the tales of Dunk and Egg. If you've only experienced Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon, you're in for an absolute treat because we're about to explore a chapter of Westeros history that takes place roughly a century before the events you know and love. This is a story about friendship, honor, adventure, and how two unlikely companions changed the course of history. So buckle up because we're heading back to the year 209 AC to meet a humble hedge knight and a mysterious bald boy who would become one of the greatest kings Westeros ever knew. Before we jump into the timeline, let's set the stage for what the tales of Dunk and Egg actually are. These stories come from a series of novellas written by George R.R. Martin, set in the same world as A Song of Ice and Fire, which is the book series that Game of Thrones was based on. So far, Martin has published 3 novellas in this series. The first one, called The Hedge Knight, came out way back in 1998. The second, The Sworn Sword, was published in 2003. And the third, The Mystery Knight, arrived in 2010. All 3 of these stories were later collected into a single volume called A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, which was published in 2015 with beautiful illustrations by Gary Gianni. Now, if you're wondering whether there will be more stories, Martin has confirmed that he plans to write additional novellas, potentially up to 9 or even 12 total stories following these characters. He's mentioned working titles like The She-Wolves of Winterfell, which would take Dunk and Egg to Winterfell to meet the Stark women, and The Village Hero, which would be set in the Riverlands. However, since Martin is still working on finishing The Winds of Winter, the next book in the main series, we're not sure when we'll get these additional tales. The exciting news for visual fans is that HBO has greenlit a television adaptation called A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, which is set to premiere in January 2026. The show will star Peter Claffey as Sir Duncan the Tall and Dexter Saul Ansell as Egg, and it's being developed with Martin's direct involvement as creator and executive producer. The first season will adapt The Hedge Knight, the first novella, and if successful, future seasons could adapt the remaining stories and even work from Martin's outlines for the unpublished novellas. Now, let's talk about when exactly these stories take place in the grand timeline of Westeros. The tales of Dunk and Egg begin in the year 209 AC. Now, if you're not familiar with how dating works in this universe, AC stands for After Conquest, meaning years after Aegon the Conqueror and his dragons unified the Seven Kingdoms under Targaryen rule. This is absolutely crucial for understanding where these stories fit. The main events of Game of Thrones begin in 298 AC, which means the tales of Dunk and Egg start approximately 89 to 90 years before everything we saw in the original series. It's not quite a full century, but close enough that we're justified in saying these are stories from about 100 years before Game of Thrones. To put this in perspective with the other shows, House of the Dragon takes place during the Dance of the Dragons, which occurred around 129 to 131 AC. So the tales of Dunk and Egg happen roughly 75 to 80 years after the devastating civil war we see in House of the Dragon. This is significant because the Dance of the Dragons marked the end of dragons in Westeros. The last Targaryen dragon died in 153 AC, which is more than 50 years before Dunk and Egg's adventures begin. So unlike both Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms will be the first show in this universe without dragons flying around. The age of dragons has passed, magic has faded from the world, and Westeros is in a period that feels more grounded and medieval, though certainly no less dangerous or politically complex. Let's talk about our 2 main characters, starting with the big guy himself, Sir Duncan the Tall, or Dunk as everyone calls him. Duncan is a massive man, standing well over 6.5 feet tall, hence the nickname. He's got the size and strength you'd expect from someone that big, but what makes him truly special is his character. Dunk grew up in the absolute worst part of King's Landing, a slum called Flea Bottom, where life is brutal and most people don't make it very far. He was an orphan with nothing to his name until he became the squire of a wandering hedge knight named Sir Arlen of Pennytree. Now, what's a hedge knight, you might ask? In the feudal system of Westeros, most knights serve a lord and have lands or at least a permanent place in some noble's household. Hedge knights are different. They're wandering knights who sleep under hedges, hence the name, and they make their living by entering tournaments, offering their sword for hire, or doing whatever work they can find. They're looked down upon by landed knights and nobles, seen as barely better than sellswords or mercenaries. But hedge knights also represent a kind of freedom and the purest ideals of knighthood, at least in theory, because they're not bound to any lord's political schemes. Dunk's mentor, Sir Arlan, trained him in the ways of knighthood and supposedly knighted him before he died, though there are hints throughout the stories that this might not be entirely true. Whether Dunk is technically a true knight or not becomes less important as the stories progress, because what matters is that Dunk embodies the ideals of knighthood better than most knights who have fancy titles and castle halls. He's honorable to a fault, brave but often naive, and he has an unshakable commitment to protecting the weak and upholding justice, even when it gets him into serious trouble. His personal sigil, which he designed himself, is a green shooting star above an elm tree at sunset. The sunset represents his love for them, taught by Sir Arlan. The elm comes from the tree where he camped, and the shooting star was one he saw and considered lucky. Now, let's talk about Egg, though that's not his real name. When Dunk first meets this bald-headed boy on the road to Ashford, he thinks Egg is just another orphan from Flea Bottom like himself. The boy is small, skinny, and has shaved his head completely bald. Egg volunteers to be Dunk's squire, and Dunk, despite having very little to offer, accepts. What Dunk doesn't know at first is that Egg is actually Prince Aegon Targaryen, the fourth son of Prince Maekar Targaryen, who himself is the fourth son of King Daeron II. Egg shaved his head to hide his distinctive silver-gold Targaryen hair so he could travel without being recognized. As a Targaryen prince, Egg is incredibly far down the line of succession at this point. He has 3 older brothers, Daeron, Aegon, and Aemon, and his father, Maekar, also has older brothers who have children of their own. Nobody expects Egg to ever become king, which is partly why his father allows him to wander Westeros with a hedge knight. But fate has a funny way of working out in this world. Despite being young when we first meet him, probably around 10 or 11 years old, Egg is remarkably intelligent, well-educated, and has a deep knowledge of Westerosi history and politics. Throughout their adventures, he often serves as Dunk's advisor, helping the naive hedge knight navigate complex political situations that Dunk would otherwise stumble through blindly. The friendship between Dunk and Egg is really the heart of these stories. Here you have a massive, common-born hedge knight and a small Targaryen prince, and they form one of the most genuine and important friendships in all of Westerosi history. Dunk sees Egg not as a prince but as his squire and eventually as something like a little brother or son. Egg, meanwhile, sees in Dunk the kind of true knight that he wants to become, someone who actually lives by the ideals that most knights only pay lip service to. Their relationship is built on mutual respect, trust, and genuine affection, and it will last for the rest of their lives. So let's break down the timeline of their adventures story by story, starting with the Hedge Knight in 209 AC. The story begins with Sir Arlan of Pennytree dying during a journey. Dunk buries his mentor with respect and takes his equipment, his armor, his 3 horses, and what little money he had left. Rather than giving up on the knight's life, Dunk decides to continue on to Ashford Castle in the Reach, where a major tournament is being held to celebrate Lord Ashford's daughter's 13th name day. On the road, Dunk stops at an inn where he encounters a very drunk man who seems disturbed by the sight of him and mutters something about a dream. This is actually Prince Daeron Targaryen, Egg's oldest brother, though Dunk doesn't know it yet. He also meets a bald boy who begs to become his squire. Dunk refuses at first and rides on, but the boy follows him and shows up at his camp. When the boy introduces himself as Egg and Dunk assumes his own name is short for Duncan, Dunk goes with it and starts calling himself Sir Duncan the Tall, which sounds much more impressive than just Dunk. At Ashford, Dunk runs into problems immediately. The steward, a man named Plummer, is suspicious because Dunk can't prove he was actually knighted. Remember, Sir Arlan supposedly knighted him, but there were no witnesses, and Dunk has no paperwork or anyone to vouch for him. Just when it looks like Dunk might be turned away, Prince Baelor Targaryen, who's known as Baelor Breakspear, steps in. Baelor is the heir to the Iron Throne, son of King Daeron II, and also the Hand of the King. He remembers jousting against Sir Arlan years ago and vouches for Dunk, allowing him to enter the tournament. Dunk needs proper armor for the joust, so he sells one of his horses to a smith named Steely Pate and commissions armor fitted for his massive frame. He also meets a puppeteer named Tansel who's performing at the tournament grounds. Dunk asks her to paint his shield with a new design since he can't use Sir Arlan's sigil. That's when he creates his personal arms with the shooting star and elm tree. On the first day of the tournament, Dunk watches from among the common folk, with Egg sitting on his shoulders so the boy can see. The jousting is spectacular, but the day ends in disgrace when Prince Aegon Targaryen, Egg's older brother, deliberately kills Sir Humphrey Harding's horse during a tilt. That night, Egg tells Dunk that Tansel is being beaten by Prince Aegon. The prince had apparently decided to punish the puppeteer for a show that featured a dragon being killed, which Aegon saw as an insult to House Targaryen. This is where Dunk's character really shines through, and also where his naive sense of justice gets him into enormous trouble. Dunk doesn't care that Aegon is a prince. He sees a woman being brutally beaten and his knight's vows compel him to protect the weak. So Dunk charges in and physically attacks Prince Aegon, striking him in the face and knocking him down. Aegon's guards immediately jump on Dunk, and they would have beaten him to death if Egg hadn't intervened. To save Dunk, Egg reveals his true identity as Prince Aegon Targaryen, Aegon's younger brother. Dunk is arrested and taken to Ashford Castle to face justice. The punishment for striking a prince is losing a hand, but Dunk chooses trial by combat instead. Aegon, furious and spiteful, demands that it be a trial of 7, an ancient form of combat where 7 champions on each side fight to the death. This is a huge problem because Dunk needs to find 6 other knights willing to fight alongside him against members of the royal family. Prince Daeron also joins the accusation, claiming Dunk kidnapped Aegon from his charge. With Egg's help, Dunk manages to recruit champions. His first supporter is Sir Stefan Fossaway, and Stefan's cousin Raymond also pledges to find more fighters. They bring Sir Humphrey Harding and Sir Humphrey Beesbury, who want revenge on Aegon for the insult to Harding during the joust. Egg personally recruits Sir Robin Riesling and Sir Lionel Baratheon, called the Laughing Storm, both eager for the glory of fighting in the first trial of 7 in a century. The 7th champion is the most surprising. Prince Baelor Breakspear himself joins Dunk's side, wearing his son's armor since he didn't bring his own to the tournament. The trial of 7 takes place on Ashford Meadow, and it's a brutal fight. Dunk manages to force Aegon to withdraw his accusations, proving his innocence, but the cost is terrible. 3 men die in the fighting. Sir Humphrey Beesbury is killed by Sir Donal of Duskendale. Sir Humphrey Harding also dies from his wounds, and most tragically, Prince Baelor Breakspear is struck in the head by a mace during the melee. After the battle, Baelor talks with Dunk and seems fine at first, but when they remove his helmet, everyone realizes that the lighter armor he borrowed from his son wasn't strong enough to protect him. The blow crushed his skull, and Baelor dies from his wounds. The man who struck that fatal blow was Prince Maekar, Baelor's own brother and Egg's father. Maekar had been fighting for Aegon's side, defending his son and House Targaryen's honor, and he accidentally killed his own brother in the process. This is absolutely devastating for Maekar, and it's something that haunts him for the rest of his life. Every year after this, Maekar observes the anniversary of Baelor's death. After the funeral, Prince Maekar approaches Dunk with a proposal. He recognizes that Aegon is cruel and twisted, and that Daeron is a drunk with no interest in knightly pursuits. Maekar sees in Dunk exactly what Egg needs, a true knight who lives by the real ideals of chivalry, someone who can teach his son to be better than his brothers. Maekar offers Dunk a position at Summerhall, the Targaryen palace where Maekar lives, to train Aegon properly. But Dunk suggests that Egg would learn more traveling the 7 kingdoms than sitting in a palace, and Maekar, still grieving and perhaps seeing the wisdom in this, agrees. The condition is that Egg must continue using his nickname rather than his princely title to avoid scandal. So Dunk and Egg set out together, a hedge knight and a secret prince wandering Westeros in search of adventure. Egg officially becomes Dunk's squire, and their legendary partnership begins. The second novella, The Sworn Sword, takes place about 2 years later in 211 AC. This story really explores what it means to be a sworn knight in Westeros and the complexities of the feudal system. Dunk has taken service with an elderly landed knight named Sir Eustace Osgrey, who lives in a small keep called Standfast. Eustace is a sad figure in many ways. He fought in the Blackfyre Rebellion, the civil war that nearly tore the realm apart, and he's never quite recovered from those days. His lands are poor, his keep is crumbling, and he has only 3 small villages sworn to him. The conflict in the story centers on water rights, which might not sound exciting, but trust me, it gets intense. A stream called the Chequy. Water runs between Standfast and Coldmoat, the castle of Lady Rohan Weber. Someone has built a dam across the stream, diverting water to Coldmoat's lands and leaving Standfast fields to dry up. Sir Bennis of the Brown Shield, another knight in Eustace's service, discovers peasants working on the dam and reacts violently, cutting one man's cheek with his sword. This creates a major problem because Lady Rohan Weber is known as the Red Widow. She's young, beautiful, and absolutely ruthless. She's already had 4 husbands, and rumors suggest she murdered at least some of them. Rohan is also in a desperate situation herself. Her father's will states that if she doesn't take a 5th husband by the 2nd anniversary of his death, her lands will pass to a male cousin. She's running out of time and can't afford to appear weak. Sir Eustace sends Dunk to Coldmoat to negotiate, hoping to avoid conflict. During his visit, Dunk learns more about the complicated history between the 2 houses. He also discovers that King Darren II himself had granted the water rights to Rohan's father, Lord Wyman Weber. Egg reads the royal parchment for Dunk since Dunk can't read. This is a recurring theme in the stories. Dunk is uneducated, but Egg's knowledge and literacy often save them. When Rohanna demands that Eustace turn over Sir Bennis for punishment, Dunk tries to use Egg's identity as leverage, showing her the prince's signet ring, but Rohan isn't impressed enough to back down. The situation escalates toward violence. Lady Rohan sends her champion, Sir Lucas Inchfield, to face Dunk in trial by combat. The fight takes place in the stream itself, and it's a brutal struggle. Dunk eventually manages to kill Sir Lucas, but he's badly wounded in the process. Egg pulls Dunk from the water and protects him while he recovers. The resolution of the conflict is surprising and practical in a very Westerosi way. Sir Eustace and Lady Rohan decide to marry each other. This solves multiple problems at once. Rohan gets her 5th husband before the deadline, keeping her lands. The water dispute is resolved since they'll now share the stream, and Eustace gets a strong, wealthy wife who can help restore his lands. It's not romantic, but it's smart. Before leaving Standfast, Lady Rohan gifts Egg with a beautiful sorrel palfrey, which Egg names Rain. This horse becomes important to Egg and is mentioned in later stories. The 3rd published novella, The Mystery Knight, takes place in 212 AC at a wedding tourney at White Walls, a castle near the God's Eye Lake. This story has the most political intrigue of the 3 published tales and connects directly to one of the great threats to Targaryen rule, the Blackfyre Pretenders. Quick history lesson: the Blackfyre Rebellion happened about 20 years before these stories. It started when a legitimized bastard of King Aegon IV named Daemon Blackfyre tried to claim the throne, supported by many great lords who thought he'd make a better king than Darren II. The rebellion was crushed at the Battle of the Redgrass Field, where Daemon and his twin sons were killed, but the surviving Blackfyres fled to Essos and continued plotting to reclaim the throne. So the threat of another rebellion is always lurking in the background of these stories. At White Walls, Lord Butterwell is hosting a wedding tourney to celebrate his marriage to a young girl who happens to be the daughter of Lord Frey. Walder Frey, the future Lord of the Twins, who we know from Game of Thrones, actually appears in this story as a 4-year-old boy. Dunk and Egg arrive at the tourney, and Egg immediately becomes suspicious because he recognizes that most of the competitors and guests are former supporters of Daemon Blackfyre. Dunk enters the joust as a mystery knight, calling himself the Gallows Knight because of the sigil on his borrowed shield. He is defeated in his first tilt by Sir Uther Underleaf, known as the Snail Knight. After losing, Dunk gives Uther his armor and horse as forfeit, as required by the rules. But Uther tells Dunk something disturbing. Someone paid Uther to kill Dunk during their tilt, though Uther chose not to go through with it. The situation at White Walls becomes more complicated when Dunk meets a knight calling himself John the Fiddler. John is charismatic and friendly, and he tells Dunk about a dream he had where Dunk was wearing the white cloak of the King's Guard. This seems like pleasant fortune telling until we learn that Jon is actually Demon Blackfire's son, another pretender to the throne. During the wedding festivities, a dragon egg goes missing. These eggs are incredibly valuable, both as symbols and because of persistent rumors that they might still be viable. Blame for the theft falls on Sir Glendon Ball, a young knight who claims to be the bastard son of Fireball, one of the great Blackfire supporters. He's imprisoned by Gorman Peak, one of the conspirators. Egg disappears while investigating, which sends Dunk into a panic. While searching for his squire, Dunk is attacked by Alan Cockshaw, who admits he was the one who bribed Uther to kill Dunk. Dunk defeats Alan and throws him down a well. He's then helped by a mysterious knight named Maynard Plum, who reveals himself as one of the many spies working for Brynden Rivers, known as Blood Raven, who is the hand of the king under Aerys Warse. Dunk eventually finds Egg in the Sept with Lord Butterwell, who's terrified after discovering Egg's true identity. Lord Butterwell's son-in-law, Black Tom Heddle, tries to kill Egg to spark the rebellion, but Dunk slays him. To buy time for Egg's escape, Dunk confronts the rebels and accuses Gorman Peak of stealing the dragon egg himself and framing Sir Glendon Ball. The rebellion is ultimately crushed before it can really begin. Bloodraven arrives with a royal army, having known about the plot all along through his network of spies. The Blackfire conspiracy at White Walls is foiled, though the threat of the Blackfires will continue for years to come. Dunk and Egg manage to escape the aftermath relatively unscathed, though they've now been directly involved in stopping a major plot against the throne. Now let's talk about what happens after these 3 published stories. Because even though we don't have the novellas yet, we know quite a bit about Dunk and Egg's future from references in the main series and from things Martin has revealed. Their friendship continues for decades. They travel together throughout Westeros, having more adventures that Martin plans to eventually write about. We know they'll visit Winterfell in the She, Wolves of Winterfell, where they'll encounter the formidable Stark women during some kind of succession crisis. They'll have adventures in the Riverlands in the Village Hero. Martin has mentioned other potential stories too, including the Sellsword, the Champion, and the King's Guard. Eventually, Egg's position in the line of succession changes dramatically. His brother Aegon, the cruel prince from the Hedge Knight, dies after drinking wildfire because he believed it would turn him into a dragon. Darren, the drunk brother, also dies. When King Mycart I, their father, dies in 233 AC, there's no clear heir. A great council is called to decide who should be king. By tradition, it should be Aeryn's infant son, but the lords refuse to crown the son of Aeryn Brightflame. The crown is also offered to Maester Aemon, who's serving at the wall, but Aemon refuses because he's taken vows. So the crown passes to Aegon, the unlikely, as he comes to be called, because nobody ever expected him to be king. When Egg becomes King Aegon V, Dunk's life changes too, but their friendship endures. Duncan joins the King's Guard, the 7 knights sworn to protect the king. He rises through the ranks and eventually becomes Lord Commander of the King's Guard, the highest position a knight can achieve. Think about that journey. A Hedge Knight from Flea Bottom, possibly not even truly knighted, becomes Lord Commander of the King's Guard. It's an incredible rise, and it happens because of Dunk's character, his loyalty to Egg, and his unwavering honor. As king, Aegon V is known for trying to help the common people and limit the power of the great lords. He makes reforms that improve the lives of peasants and small folk, which makes him beloved by the common people but creates tension with the nobility. Many of Aegon's reforms are later undone after his death, but he's remembered as one of the better Targaryen kings. It's likely that Egg's time wandering Westeros with Dunk, seeing how common people actually live, influenced his later policies as king. The friendship between Dunk and Egg ends in tragedy, though the exact details are deliberately left mysterious. In 259 AC, there's an event called the Tragedy at Summerhall. Summerhall is the Targaryen summer palace, the same place where Maekar wanted to train Egg all those years ago. King Aegon V dies there in a great fire along with his oldest son and heir, Prince Duncan, who was named after Duncan the Tall. Sir Duncan the Tall, Lord Commander of the King's Guard, also dies at Summerhall. The circumstances of the tragedy are unclear, but it's heavily implied that it involved an attempt to hatch dragon eggs. Aegon V was obsessed with bringing dragons back, believing they would give him the power to enforce his reforms for the common people. Something went terribly wrong with whatever ritual or attempt they made, and the result was a fire that killed the king, his heir, and Duncan. Rhaegar Targaryen, the future prince we know from Game of Thrones lore, was actually born at Summerhall on the same day as the tragedy, literally born in the midst of fire and death. So there you have it, the complete timeline of Duncan and Egg, from their meeting at Ashford in 209 AC, through their decades of adventures and friendship, all the way to their deaths together at Summerhall in 259 AC. It's a story that spans 50 years, from a simple hedge knight and a disguised prince to the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard and the King of Westeros. What makes these stories so special is how different they are in tone from the main series. A Song of Ice and Fire is dark and cynical, constantly deconstructing fantasy tropes and showing how honor gets you killed and how the Game of Thrones is brutal and amoral. But Dunk and Egg, while certainly not naive or simplistic, are much more hopeful. They're stories where honor and friendship actually matter, where a common-born knight can make a difference through sheer decency, where a prince and a peasant can form a genuine bond that lasts a lifetime. These are tales of a simpler time in Westeros, though simple doesn't mean easy. There are no dragons flying overhead, no magical threats from beyond the wall, no world-ending prophecies. Instead, we get stories about tournaments and feudal disputes, about wandering the roads and sleeping under the stars, about what it really means to be a knight in a world that often falls far short of knightly ideals. And at the heart of it all is this wonderful friendship between two people who should never have met, who came from completely different worlds, but who became the most important people in each other's lives. The upcoming HBO series, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, will finally bring these stories to the screen, introducing a whole new audience to Dunk and Egg. If you're a fan of Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon, I can't recommend the novellas enough. They're collected in A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. They're relatively short and very readable, and they'll give you a completely different perspective on Westeros. You'll see the great houses we know so well, the Starks and Baratheons and Lannisters, but in a different era, with different characters facing different challenges. Thank you so much for watching this deep dive into the timeline of Tales of Dunk and Egg. I hope this has given you a clear understanding of when these stories take place, how they fit into the larger history of Westeros, and why these characters matter so much. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the world of Game of Thrones, and let me know in the comments which Dunk and Egg story you're most excited to see adapted for television. Will it be the Trial of Seven from the Hedge Knight, the Water Dispute from the Sworn Sword, or the Conspiracy at White Walls from the Mystery Knight? Let me know your thoughts, and I'll see you in the next video.